This is part 2 in this YouTube series where I am working to convert this RPG game into this pseudo 3D racing game. In the last episode, I created a new game package and moved the game struct and methods into separate files. Now, the focus of this episode will be on extending the scene management code. I will reduce some repetition in the existing code, add some new methods, rename some things, and then drastically simplify the game update method. The tasks will be as follows. Add more error handling to the existing scene methods. Add a new scene struct that can be inherited by other scenes. Add new methods for getting the current scene's ID and getting the next scene ID. Rename some existing methods. Change the game update method, return an error and set the next scene. Initialize every scene in the new game constructor function. These changes will allow me to add commonality between scenes and reduce repetition. It will also allow each scene to be in charge of what scene it switches to next. Finally, the cognitive complexity of the game update method will be reduced and operate more generically. I will start by modifying the scene interface. This will produce many errors across the code as I do this, but we can follow these breadcrumbs to repair the code. I find this to be a good way to refactor code. First, change the interface. Then, fix any errors that are produced as a result of those changes. You can immediately see what files and functions are affected when you start making changes like this. VS Code is quite responsive and will show you the errors as you type, so you can quickly see what needs to be fixed. First, I want the update method to align with the Ebitengine game update method, so I will make it return an error. I also want the first load method to be called init, since I want to use that to initialize the scene. This will allow me to loop through all scenes and initialize them all at once. I also want the onEnter and onExit methods to return an error. I will be changing the update method to set the next scene ID, instead of returning it directly in the method. So I need two new getter methods, ID, which will return the scene's identifier, and next, which will return the ID of the scene that will be switched to next. Finally, I will add a new method called setFreezeFrame, which will accept an Ebitengine image as an argument. This will allow me to pass images between scenes, which will mainly be used for the pause screen, but can have other uses. Now that the interface changes are complete, I will start following the errors produced by these changes. I am going to pick a place to start. The start scene seems like a logical place to begin. I will fix this scene and then repeat the process for the other two scenes. I renamed first load to init and it also needs to return an error. The onEnter and onExit methods also need to return errors. The same is true of the update method, so I need to adjust that to return an error as well. As I mentioned earlier, the update method will now set the next scene ID instead of returning it directly. So I will need a new field for that, called next. This field does not exist yet, but it will. Since the other methods I need to create also have fields that do not exist yet, I will create all the methods and then add the fields afterwards. These first two functions are getter methods, so they can just return the appropriate field. The setFreezeFrame is a setter method, so it will accept an argument of screen, and set that to the freezeframe field. Finally, while I am down here, at the bottom of the file, I will move this nil variable that points out when I am not compliant with the interface, up to the top where it makes more sense. Now, I need to create the new fields for this scene, so all these methods are not producing an error. I know for my 3 new methods, I need some new fields and these are common between all scenes since they all comply with the same interface. Each scene is also manually defining a loaded field. While that does work, it is repetitive. It would be better if there was a way to define this field once, and have all scenes use it. In the scenes.go file, I am adding a new private struct called scene. This struct will contain fields that are common between all scenes. Then, each scene can embed this struct to inherit those fields. I will just call it scene, and it will contain loaded, ID, next, and freezeframe. Now that my scene struct is set, how do I get each scene to use it? All you need to do is set the scene struct as an anonymous field in each scene struct. If you hover over this type, you can now see it is embedding fields from that new scene struct. This change breaks the new scene constructor, but can be fixed by adding a new scene field and moving the loaded field to the scene struct. With that change in place, all of those errors in this file are now gone. I can now move on to the next scene and do the same to the other two scenes. I will first remove the loaded field and embed the scene type. Then, in the new scene constructor, I will add the scene type and set the loaded field to false. I will fix the game scene in the same way. The game scene has a lot more code than the start scene did, but the refactoring is the same. Edit or add methods to conform to the interface. First load needs to be renamed to init, and it also needs to return an error. The update method also needs to return an error, and it needs to set the next scene ID instead of returning it. It needs to return nil immediately after setting the next scene to avoid any more logic from running in the method. At the end of the method, it also needs to set the default next scene, which is itself, and then return nil. There is an inconsistency here. I have been using S as my variable name for the scene, but this one uses G. This clashes with Ebitengine's G variable, which is used for the game object. I will change this to S to be consistent with the other scenes. I will just do a search and replace to fix that. There are also a lot of G.player references, and G.potions, G.enemies, etc., so I will change those to S as well. This is a lot of changes, but it is all consistent with the interface I am trying to create. Now that those changes are made, I need to add my new getter and setter methods. And these onEnter and onExit methods also need to return an error. Now 2 of the 3 scene files are error-free. In the pause scene, I will follow the same pattern to fix it. Rename first load, return errors, and set the next scene ID in the update method. Lastly, create the 3 new methods. There are 2 files left with errors. The first is game.go. This needs the first load methods renamed to init, and then it needs to properly handle the error. I mentioned earlier that I want to loop through all scenes and call their init method, so I will do that here. At present, this just loads the first scene. I want to initialize all my scenes when the game is first created. There are different approaches to loading your game, like handling it during load screens, or only loading things when they are needed. But I want to load all my scenes at once since it is a small game. To do that, I will wrap the init calls in a for loop and call the init method for each scene. I just need to replace active scene ID with the current scene's ID using the new method I created. My gameupdate.go file is the last file needing changes. At present, there is not a lot of code here, but visually, I find it a bit hard to follow. I changed my scene update methods to always set the next scene ID, so I could simplify the logic here. This method will look quite different when I am finished with it, but it will be easier to follow the logic. To facilitate this change, I need to make a slight change to the game type. Instead of having an active scene ID field, I will change it to be the current scene, which will be of type scene. This will give me access to the entire scene's interface and all the methods it has, making it easier to follow the logic. By adding this field, the new game constructor is broken a bit, so I will update the field name here. I also prefer to have named fields, so I will make that change here as well. Since my game will only care about the current scene and the scene that is coming next, I can adjust the logic in this game update method. I do not need this chunk of code since the scene type already has a next scene ID field. This logic is still good. If the current scene ID is not the same as the next, a switch is about to happen. I first want to check for the pause state, but I will come back to that in just a bit so the fundamental logic of this function is clear. We already know what the next scene is going to be because the scene's update method is doing that work, so I can remove this code. After pausing, the first thing I wanted to do is exit the current scene. This could be used to unload assets, change the screen, or whatever else is needed to prepare for the next scene. Then we can make the switch to the next scene by setting g.current to the appropriate scene from the scene map, using the next scene ID. After that, we will enter the new scene. Each scene could have its own logic for entering, like loading assets or resetting the game state. Right now, these functions are empty and do not do anything, but it is nice to have pre- and post-entry points to do that work when needed. Finally, outside of the conditional, we always want to update the current scene. All of these methods actually need to have their errors handled, but for brevity, I left that out until now so the logic is easier to follow. Since I changed the game field from a scene ID to a scene, the draw method is now broken. The fix is simple, just replace this scene map call with g.current.draw. I am going to stub out the pause screen logic, since the existing game does not actually use it right now, and the pause screen is where the next episode of this series will pick up. If I run the game, you will notice it is stuck at the start screen. This is because I need to set the next scene ID during each scene's new scene constructor method. By default, each scene should set its ID to itself, and its next scene to itself as well, so it stays there until the user triggers a request to change it. So after I make that change for all 3 scenes and run the game again, it works just as it did before. You can move your player, switch scenes, and pause and unpause. That was a big refactor without any visible change to the game itself, but it is a good start to the next episode, where I will be implementing the pause screen and some other features.